Born on December 2, 1825, in the opulent Quinta de Boa Vista Palace in Rio de Janeiro, Dom Pedro de Alcântara João Carlos Leopoldo Salvador Bibiano Francisco Xavier de Paula Leocadio Miguel Gabriel Rafael Gonzaga, later known as Emperor Pedro II of Brazil, entered the world as the heir to one of the largest and most complex empires in the Americas. The son of Emperor Pedro I of Brazil and Empress Maria Leopoldina of Austria, a scion of the Habsburg dynasty, and was thrust into destiny when his father abdicated the Brazilian throne in 1831 and returned to Portugal, leaving the 5-year-old boy emperor under a regency in a fragile empire fraught with regional revolts, political factionalism, and an uncertain future. Isolated by his youth and burdened by his royal role, the child emperor was surrounded by tutors, military officers, and conservative aristocrats who shaped his early intellectual and emotional world, cultivating in him a lifelong passion for science, the arts, astronomy, and languages. He would eventually learn over 10 and correspond with great minds like Victor Hugo and Charles Darwin, as he watched the turbulent Regency years unravel with rebellions such as the Cabanagem, Sabaneta, and Baleada threatening to fracture the empire, until pressure from political elites brought him to power prematurely at age 14 in 1840 through the Golpe de Maioridade, or coup of majority, thus beginning one of the longest and most enlightened reigns in 19th-century Latin America. Once enthroned, Pedro II evolved into a disciplined, thoughtful, and moral monarch who sought to stabilize his country through constitutional rule, the expansion of education, infrastructure projects, and moderate reforms, all while maintaining a calculated neutrality in the ever-intensifying global conflicts of empire and ideology. He prioritized diplomacy over war and invested heavily in telegraphs, railroads, and literacy campaigns, guiding Brazil through decades of peace and economic growth that earned him respect as a modernizer and as a stabilizing symbol in a region otherwise riddled with caudillos, coups, and instability. He presided over a prosperous coffee economy, spearheaded urban modernization in Rio, and tactfully expanded the empire's geopolitical reach during the victorious Paraguayan War, 1864 to 1870. A brutal but decisive conflict that saw Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay crush the ambitions of Paraguay's dictator Solano Lopez, thereby affirming Pedro II's international standing while also draining imperial resources and lives. This war, although a triumph, marked a turning point as the emperor grew increasingly disillusioned with politics and power, haunted by the death of his only son and heir, Prince Afonso, in 1847, which shattered his dynastic hopes and made him inwardly detached from the idea of monarchy itself, stating privately that the monarchy was only useful to Brazil, not to him personally. Despite his personal grief, Pedro II continued to act as a progressive monarch, slowly navigating Brazil toward the abolition of slavery, a deeply entrenched institution supported by the landowning elite, by supporting laws like the Law of the Free Womb in 1871, which freed children born to enslaved mothers, and culminating in the Lei Aurea or Golden Law of 1888, signed by his daughter and regent Princess Isabel, which abolished slavery entirely, a morally triumphant moment but one that fatally alienated the planter aristocracy, the very foundation of monarchical support, and created an opening for republican sentiment among disgruntled elites and an ambitious military class increasingly inspired by positivism and disillusioned by Pedro II's aging figurehead status and refusal to adapt the monarchy to new power realities. Stoic, unpretentious, and more interested in books than banquets, Pedro II gradually withdrew from ceremonial life and public engagement, traveling extensively in Europe and North Africa, immersing himself in intellectual circles and scientific congresses, where he was often greeted with admiration for his erudition and simplicity. Yet this physical and emotional distance from Brazil allowed Republican conspiracies to foment, and on November 15, 1889, a bloodless military coup led by Marshal Deodoro da Fonseca ended Brazil's monarchy and declared a republic, catching the emperor and the nation by surprise. Pedro II, ever dignified, refused to resist or shed Brazilian blood for the throne, and with his family was sent into exile in Europe, living modestly in hotels and guesthouses in Portugal and France, where he remained intellectually active but melancholic, heartbroken by the loss of his country and uncertain of Brazil's future, until he died quietly in Paris on December 5, 1891, at the age of 66, his final words reportedly being, "May God grant me these last wishes, peace and prosperity for Brazil," a poignant reflection of his selfless dedication to the nation that had shaped his entire life. Only after his death did Brazil begin to recognize his immense legacy, and in 1920 his remains were returned with honor to Brazil, where he is today remembered not just as its last emperor but as a symbol of wisdom, integrity, and progress, a monarch who reigned not with force but with humility, intellect, and a deep sense of duty to his people.